slowly because I can still see people are joining the webinar. It's great to see so many people who have shown an interest and registered, and obviously we expect that there will not necessarily be the full complement of people who registered, but great to see the numbers that are actually here. So obviously this webinar is following publication of the revised analyst guide HSG 248, and the purpose of today's meeting is to explain how UKAS is going to recognise the revised version of the analyst guide from an accreditation perspective. The process that we're going to outline has been designed to provide a pragmatic approach to implementation and recognition of the changes that have been put in place. Obviously, we've got to maintain the confidence in the competence of laboratories to fulfil the requirements of 17025 at the same time. I'm absolutely delighted to say that we're accompanied today by Sam Lord from HSE. Sam is the HSE Principal Specialist Inspector in Occupational Hygiene, Technical and Strategic Lead for Asbestos, Waste and Recycling and Metalworking Fluids. She's going to start our presentation today, and then I'm going to pass over to George Sanders, who is UKAS's Asbestos Specialist and primary point of contact. Also today, we've got a panel of people that we can ask questions to, and again, we'll come to that shortly. Louise Wainwright is our UKAS technical focal person, but we also have myself, I'm UKAS Operations Director, Juliet Love, who is the section head responsible for asbestos, and also helping us today is Sonia Dode, who's the UKAS Marketing Specialist, who will be coordinating all your Q&A. From the perspective of Q&A, if you look at the Zoom screen at the bottom, there are two areas. There's Q&A and chat. Please can you put in your questions and answers as we go along through the Q&A process, because that will allow us to answer those questions and publish them. And afterwards, all of that information will be available to participants. The other thing to say is that we're going to record or are recording this webinar, and the webinar will be put on the UKAS website so that people can go back and refer and scroll backwards and forwards through the Zoom webinar and get all the information that they need. So, as I say, hopefully you'll be able to ask the questions and get all of the responses that you want from the presentation. But we do have that Q&A session at the end. Hopefully we'll be able to finish our presentation in sort of 40 minutes or so, which should give us plenty of time for 20 to 30 minutes of questions at the end. It may be that some of those questions are very specific to your organisation, and we may wish to take those offline and not answer them in public. So please be mindful that if you've put in a question and we don't answer it, it could be because that we feel that we need to contact you individually. But using that Q&A mechanism, we can direct our responses straight over to you, and we'll pull out all of the Q&A at the end, and then we'll put those on the UKAS website as well. So I guess it just remains for me to pass over to Sam from HSE to kick us off on our webinar. Over to you, Sam.
That's great. Thanks, Paul. Morning, everyone. Hope everyone's well. So I don't have control of the slide, so I'll have to say that the Chris Whitty thing. Next slide, please. So if I could have the next slide, and actually the next slide after that, that'd be great. Thank you. So I'm just going to talk to you for about 5 minutes, just as by way of an introduction to the new publication. So why has it been updated? It's been, as with a lot of guidance, it's obviously been updated to take account of legal changes. So for example, since the last 248, the control of asbestos regulations have been updated twice, but also findings from the analyst inspection programme, which was undertaken by HSE back in 2014 and 2015. And unfortunately, this found quite a lot of concerning practice, things like analysts undertaking substantial cleaning of enclosures themselves, personal monitoring to check compliance with the 4-hour control limit, only being undertaken for very short sampling durations of around 30 minutes, and therefore not representative worker exposure, and quite a number of other things which were quite concerning. The other thing is obviously developments in the analytical procedures and methodologies. So there's new guidance on sample prep techniques for bulk ID, which is more detailed than the previous version. And obviously MDHS 87 has now been incorporated into Appendix 4 of the guidance. So that's the fibre discrimination techniques for fibre counting. And as with all HSE guidance, it has been written to help analysts meet their legal obligations and to assist others with duties to meet theirs. Next slide, please. So I realise actually looking at this doesn't show quite an exciting layout, but the point is that it is a new layout. There's more pages, but it's actually divided into more sections this time to make it easier to read and cross-reference. So this is, I mean, I was talking to someone the other day, but it is actually the largest and most technical piece of HSE guidance. It's got more pages, as I just said, but it's now divided into 4 parts, which you can see on the slide there. And parts 1 to 3 are further subdivided into chapters for easier reading and referencing. And then in part 4, that's where you'll find the technical appendices. These actually make up about 2/3 of the document, but you'll see there's various different things like template forms, competency tables, as well as the more technical methodologies, which many of you will be interested in today. I'd make a plea at this point, really just to make all analysts to read certainly the introduction, part 1, and the relevant chapters and appendices relevant to the work they undertake. You won't be able to do it all in one go because it won't go in. I've tried having to proofread it a number of times, and it's quite a lot to do in a single session. But I'm certain you will learn something new and refresh your existing knowledge, and certainly gain clarity where it wasn't before. Next slide, please. So the work of an analyst, whether undertaking bulk ID or a 4-stage clearance, is critical to ensuring that workers and the public are not exposed to asbestos. There is no real-time instrument that can reliably and quickly detect asbestos fibres in bulk samples, asbestos debris or airborne respirable fibres. So we must really rely on analysts to do this, which invariably requires some time to be spent to do a thorough job. Analysts therefore have a huge responsibility to ensure the risks to themselves and others from asbestos exposure is prevented or minimised. Personally, I have a regular stream of bulk ID reports, clearance certificates passed to me for review from HSE inspectors, and unfortunately there's still poor practice out there. I am aware, though, speaking in a lot of forums and conferences and speaking to a lot of people on site, that improving standards very much requires a cross-sector approach. Certainly the administrative work to fulfil the requirements of UKAS accreditation, including audit, is important, as is regulation and guidance. However, if I use the analogy of driving a car in the UK, you need a licence. You must have read the highway code, which is enforced by the police, but this doesn't stop breaches for various reasons. Rushing to pick up the kids from school, not keeping up to date on the revisions of the highway code, or even rereading it from time to time, knowing that the mobile police speed camera is not around this week. When driving a car, this is a risk some of us take, as the consequences are likely to be low: a speed awareness course, fine, or points on your licence. When the consequence of exposure is exposure to a carcinogen and possible asbestos-related disease, then most will think twice. Asbestos is a non-threshold carcinogen, and the public are depending on you and your staff to make sure buildings and other areas where asbestos is removed are clean. This message, though, must be promoted to the clients who employ you and the licence removal contractors. And myself and other members of HSE are working with external stakeholders to use the revised HSG 248 as a platform to do this. Next slide, please. So finally, some important points to note. The second edition of 248 would have been available from last Friday at that link, but if you just Google HSG 248, you'll be taken there. But unfortunately, much to my distress, There was a problem on Friday due to the size of the file. It is a huge publication, and currently this morning we've got the web teams and the publishers working to resolve that. As such, I can't guarantee that it'll be online by the end of today, but I'm pretty confident that it'll be there this week sometime. So I do apologise. I had wanted to give you some, at least be able to log on and find it, but then I suppose at least you'll pay attention to this presentation rather than eagerly trying to look at it now. The printed version will be available in June. It costs £30 and it's via the link above or via the bookstore, which I've given you the link there too. But again, just put in HSG248 and you'll easily be able to find where to pre-order the publication or purchase it when it becomes available as a printed version. There's a deliberate delay before the print run, and this is in case of any corrections that are spotted by readers. If you do spot anything that's incorrect, please let me know or let any of your contacts for UKAS know, and we can get those sorted. Thank you for your time this morning. I hope that's been informative. Oh, I haven't forgotten, sorry, forgotten the last bit there. The HSE reference sample images, which you'll see on pages 128 and 129, because of the print version not being necessarily providing the clarity on PC screens, we do advise that you use your existing printed version from 2005 until such time that the printed version is purchased. So that's just a note there. And then finally, all it is for me to say is thank you for your time this morning. I hope that was informative, and I'll now pass you over to George Sanders. Thank you very much.
Good morning, everyone. My name's George Sanders. Thank you for that, Sam. And I'm now going to run through the transition process of recognising the revised analyst guide for accreditation purposes. Before I do that, though, it's probably worth spending a moment or two acknowledging the existing status of accreditation within this sector. As this slide shows, there are around 200 laboratories accredited across a range of sampling and testing activities involving asbestos. There are other activities as well, which are not shown here, and those include aspects such as water absorption, the quantification of asbestos in soils, and fibre discrimination in air. Over the years, the control of asbestos regulations, now 2012, gives minimum standards for protecting employees from risks associated with exposure to asbestos. And together with an approved code of practice, that's L143, and the guidance, the analyst guide, which give practical advice on how to comply with the legal duties set out in the regulations, UKAS accredits those aspects of asbestos testing so affected. So with the exception of a few notable activities, such as the sampling of bulk materials for asbestos identification, and those as previously identified, including the quantification of asbestos in soils, regulation mandates accreditation in virtually all other asbestos-related testing activities to undertake on a commercial basis. Regarding schedules of accreditation, UKAS will accredit to the most recent or current version of a recognised method or statement. The presence of a date is not required, although for most of you, you will recognise 2005 is noted with regards to mention of the analyst guide. That said, UKAS does retain internal records of this. Therefore, aside from the ensuing transition process, schedules are going to go through a process of revision to standardise wording for consistency. And as the transition process is completed, the year will be removed from the method. So 2021 will not form part of the schedule wording going forwards. So a little bit about the transition process itself. Given the inextricable link between accreditation and HSG 248, it is recognised that laboratories However prepared they may already be for the reissued guidance, this being based, for example, on the previous draft consultation documents and or subsequent HSC presentations, labs will not be working to the revised guidance immediately and will need an opportunity to digest, consolidate and implement the new edition and its changes that are of relevance to their own scope of activities. Now, accreditation recognises competence and conformity to a known standard, and in this case, that's ISO IEC 17025. Schedules of accreditation, together with applied test methods, reflect this recognition. Therefore, when methods are changed or updated, suitable justification is needed to ensure continuous recognition of accreditation. In this case, appropriate confidence has to be ascertained from laboratories in the implementation of the additional requirements of the revised guidance before accreditation can be formally acknowledged against it. Ideally, UKAS would assess the effective implementation of each affected laboratory and update schedules on a rolling basis over the course of a 12 to 18 month period as labs receive their scheduled assessment. However, this is deemed commercially unworkable with possible claims of preferential treatment by labs who, through the timing of their assessments, may consider themselves to be at a commercial disadvantage, with early adopters able to market their compliance with perceived benefit. Therefore, a suitable compromise is needed to ensure a timely transition with commercial fairness. To facilitate this, then, the process of transition will be conducted out with the scheduled assessment process. In essence, this will be a remote activity with a self-declaration plus evidence, split into defined timelines or windows, as I will map shortly on the next slide. This is intended to provide an even benchmark towards all laboratories, whilst expediting the process at the same time for recognition purposes. During the transition period, it is expected that UKAS accredited laboratories continue to uphold the technical requirements associated with the existing edition 1 of the analyst guide, whilst working towards the revisions as detailed in the now soon to be published second edition of HSG 248. To attain sufficient confidence in the revisions being implemented, labs will be required to submit suitable evidence to UKAS in addition to providing a self-declaration that will acknowledge they meet the relevant guidance as documented in the Analyst Guide 2021. Now, this is going to be facilitated by Doc A, which will be available for download from the UKAS website in due course. And Doc A will provide the means for a laboratory to self-declare, and it will also prescribe the supporting evidence required to uphold the transition process. The evidence will reflect the actions of the laboratory to demonstrate compliance with the updated guidance. Now, this is not observed to be additional. And what I mean by that is records of requested evidence should be present in the lab's systems of work as a result of the implemented changes from within the guidance. That said, when it comes to evidence submission, it would be appreciated if the evidence as submitted is clearly identified and either embedded directly into Doc A or identifiable from to Doc A. With regards to feedback, the process of review is designed to mirror how evidence from scheduled assessments is currently managed post-visit or assessment. i.e. once Doc A is submitted by yourselves, UKAS will review the evidence and declaration and respond with an outcome via Doc B. If found suitable, the lab will be formed, and on the preset transition date, which you'll see shortly is defined as the 1st of February 2022, it will have its own accreditation updated to reflect the revised guidance. If not, then Doc B will detail what is lacking, and the lab will have a second opportunity to resubmit. Resubmission of Doc A will need to be in its entirety. It is envisaged that most labs will complete the process within 2 submissions. Those that do not will be contacted and managed individually. However, the timeline of the process is such that UKAS will not be able to guarantee transition by the assigned date for those labs that require more than two submissions. Additional cost is also likely as a result due to the increased time and effort needed to oversee the additional contingent of work this will entail. Regarding costs, the cost of the transition work will be a minimum of half a day of effort. This is around £475 plus VAT at current rates, but this will depend on the size of the organisation and may lead to additional chargeable work being necessary in the case of poor submissions. Our expectation is that the majority of customers will be levied half a day, but this will be determined on a case-by-case basis and communicated to each customer. In addition, just note that as this process will be via desktop review, there will be no TNS component. So on to post-transition. Whilst acknowledged that the submission of evidence will go some way to demonstrate implementation of the changes, it is accepted that the effectiveness of said implementation will need to be ascertained post-transition. Subsequent scheduled events in 2022 will therefore hone in on changes where relevant to laboratories. The aim will be not to add effort to these subsequent assessments unless the scope changes or issues are identified that require an extra assessment to be conducted. Ultimately, assessments will be undertaken to ascertain the required degree of confidence in competence and conformity. I will stress at this point, though, that regarding the subsequent assessments post-transition, these will be assessing the effectiveness of the implemented changes. Any organisation found not having implemented the changes as confirmed in the self-declaration or via the evidence submitted will face sanctions which may affect their accredited status. Now, a little bit about the actual timeline. As we know, HSG 248 is in the process of being published, as just mentioned by Sam. Therefore, the first timeline or window, as just mentioned, actually begins now. Labs will have around a 3-month window as a minimum to absorb and implement the changes in their technical activities within their supporting management system. UKAS, stakeholders and assessors alike will use this period to evaluate the impact of those changes. As of the 1st of September and not before, laboratories will be able to submit their declarations to UKAS with supporting evidence requested. It is acknowledged that due to the varying scopes retained by laboratories, the time needed to complete this process will affect some more than others. Therefore, this second scheduled window of 3 months will in effect provide up to 6 months for a laboratory who may have a complex scope and multi-site, for example, to conduct a full gap analysis, implement the required changes, as well as submit evidence of implementation as applicable to UKAS. Declarations will not be accepted before the 31st of August. This is primarily to encourage a timely process of implementation within laboratories. Likewise, to ensure the process remains effective, UKAS will only guarantee appropriate recognition of transition to those laboratories who submit their initial declaration and evidence before the 1st of December. Where customers do not submit their initial declaration, that's Doc A, by this time, UKAS cannot guarantee that their accreditation will be recognised by the 1st of February. And whilst follow-up submissions of declarations may be received by UKAS after the 1st of December, any customers with declaration reviews not completed by the 1st of February 2022 may face sanctions because edition 1 of 248 will no longer be recognised for accreditation purposes beyond this date. Therefore, it is in the interest of all laboratories to implement the requirements in a timely manner and submit their declarations as early as possible after the 1st of September. From the 1st of December onwards, UKAS will complete the process of review and feedback to laboratories utilising Doc B. And as of the 1st of February, there will be the formal recognition of transition. I will just note that formal recognition will be dependent on any associated invoices being cleared by the laboratory at that point. Now, during this period, there will obviously be new applicants or existing laboratories who subsequently apply for accreditation as an extension in any of the affected tests. These will be assessed to the revised guidance. There is no perceived commercial advantage to applications of this nature during this period compared to those laboratories going through the transition process, as the timeline for new applications and extensions to scope are observed to be of a similar duration to that as being prescribed for the transition itself. New applicants may also not have the benefit of the required infrastructure and supporting processes that are currently demonstrated by existing accredited laboratories. So, a little bit then about supporting information. Whilst, as Paul's mentioned, this webinar is being recorded and will be available from the UKAS website for future viewing, there are going to be other sources of information regarding this transition. We currently have the Asbestos Technical Bulletin edition 5 published, and this will be reissued shortly. This will provide some transitional information for viewing by both laboratories and inspection bodies for awareness purposes. There is also a UKAS website, and the link is shown there. This will be where there will be a placeholder to be able to download DOC-A in due course, and it's not going to be available for a few weeks. And the purpose of this is so as not to bias the action of laboratories who will conduct their own full gap analysis of 248 and the actions that they need to undertake as a result. Management system policies and procedures will support how those changes need to be documented and implemented. It is seen that DOC-A should complement this process. And as I believe Sam's already put up on a slide, but there is also the link for the publications page on the HSE website. Regarding Lab 30, which is the key supporting document for asbestos test laboratories. Now, for those of you who may already be aware, it has just completed a public consultation last month. And the main primary reason for this was on the back of 17025 being revised. And this will be published shortly. However, it will be out with any of the changes to the Analyst Guide Edition 2. Lab 30 will undergo a further review in a few months' time once laboratories, assessors and stakeholders have had suitable opportunity to become familiar with the impacts of the implementation of the revised guidance and to ascertain how these need to be recognised in support of accreditation and the sector as a whole. So hopefully that has been clear with regards to the process and the timeline. We have now reached the point in the webinar for the opportunity for you to ask questions. So I will now hand over to my colleagues to see if there have any questions have been received.
Okay, I'll take this opportunity just to thank again George and Sam. Now, I think that Juliet, who's the section head for AFLA, has been looking through the questions, and I think she's going to pose those to the relevant individuals. Is that right, Juliet?
Yeah, so I've just been looking through. Please, can I just let a few people know that we have some quick answers have been just typed into a chat, and anything that would be applicable to everyone is in there. So if you have got anything through that, that will be in the question and answers area. But there's a couple that maybe need a little more explanation or clarification around them. So one question we have been asked, which obviously is quite relevant to the fact we now have 248 out, is about whether UKAS, as the organisation, will be providing accreditation for the soils or site assessment using Chapter 7 of the new guidance. So I think it's fair to say that obviously this was something that was holding up our development project and areas around that. And I think it's worth maybe George or Paul confirming if they've got anything further around this, but it is a part that would be moved on, and we would look now, having this guidance, to be looking at where our accreditation sits, progressing that as a project. But just to reiterate, is a development project at this point and nothing that is formally in operations as yet.
Probably one more for George, really.
Yes, thanks, Paul. Yes, there is a development project looking at asbestos in contaminated land. And there has been some discussions in recent months with regards to the most appropriate method and approach to adopt for taking that forwards. Once 248 has been published, then obviously that development project will aim to proceed utilising the methods as described. So yes, that is something that is happening in due course. Thank you.
Hi, there is another question regards Lab 30 RGA and whether I'm assuming the question is whether the current now 248 is being revised, whether it's going to delay the current publication of those documents which have just recently been sent out for public consultation. In short, no, the public consultation will still stand, and there will be an opportunity then to have a further public consultation after we've been able to review 248 and incorporate additional bits. So the idea is that we'll be able to publish a revised version of Lab 30 and RGA, and then subsequently we will do further revisions to those and go through a public consultation to revise any relevant details to the new 248 publication. Okay, thanks.
Okay, I have a question. I'm going to pose this one to George. Will UKAS be providing a gap analysis template with the information to be used, which was similar to the one that was circulated to laboratories for transition to 17025?
The short answer to that is no. It's expected the laboratories will do their own gap analysis because each laboratory has their own defined scope. Not all the scopes are the same, unlike 17025, which affects all laboratories across the board. So with regards to the gap analysis, that's, like I say, some of the laboratories will do themselves. The Doc A, which I've mentioned, will obviously prescribe certain criteria with regards to evidence to submit back to UKAS based on where it's considered to be, the changes are considered to be of greater significance for accreditation purposes, as well as obviously in conjunction with input from the HSC. So there will be a number of pointers, shall we say, in Doc A, but we don't want to bias laboratories by providing that up front. So we expect laboratories to be able to go away and absorb the changes for themselves and put in place their own sort of mechanisms that are going to work for them. And like I said earlier on, Doc A should actually complement those changes that affect them individually. The Doc A as well as will ultimately be used by UKAS in the sort of ongoing process of acknowledging laboratories through the transition process, and then in 2022 UKAS will obviously assess the effective implementation of those. So hopefully that answers that question.
Thanks, George. Okay, I have a technical question regarding bulk ID sample prep, and it's in specific relation to table A 2.2, and the question is, does table A 2.2 mean that you cannot, under any circumstances, report textured coating as NAD unless you've done acid prep, and you can't report bitumen or floor tiles as NAD unless you've done solvent prep? So again, I'll probably put that one to you, George, or maybe Louise as well.
That's probably one for Louise more so, or even posed towards Sam, the HSC. I'm just conscious that table A 2.2 people may not be actually able to observe yet. And I'm not sure whether that's changed since I saw the last version myself. So
yeah, unfortunately, George, we don't have a copy of the table in front of us at the moment.
So yeah, so probably defer that question. and we'd come back to the person who's posed it later on once we've seen it.
Yeah, George, I'm afraid I'm not a bulk ID analyst, so
Yeah.
I can't help, I'm afraid. But yeah, we can get back to people on that one.
Sure.
Okay, thank you. That leads itself to a question that came in at the very outset of the Q&A, which was, could we possibly provide a link to the recording to everyone who's attended? Because it's sometimes difficult to home directly through the UKAS website into that link. The response to that is absolutely. The recording will be made available both on the website, but it will also be emailed to all of the attendees of this webinar. Okay, I guess a question again for George, Louise, and probably Sam. Will HSE and UKAS track and participate in SEN TC 351 working group 5 on development of analytical methodology on asbestos in construction products, i.e. recycled aggregates, which is a medium which is obviously significantly different to soils?
I would
sorry, George.
I was just going to say that would sound to be potentially an extension to scope, I believe. I might be wrong on that, because that sounds to be out with what we currently recognise for accreditation if we're talking about recycled materials, if I've understood that question correctly. Louise, were you going to add to that?
I was just going to say that I think if there's anything to do with if it's outside of current accreditations, then it will be tracked through the development project. If it's anything to do with the land,
yeah, I think it probably feeds into that whole development
rather than the transition process
sector.
really.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Can I just pick up on a question that has just been submitted, which should be quite quick to answer, which is that the docs A and B, and just to let people know, obviously they will be available shortly and will be looked at. But obviously at this point, we're trying to concentrate on the transition process and where it is, and obviously the depth of the documents could have detracted from that. So they will be available shortly to assist through the process as George has explained them. I think it's fair to say, looking through the comments, thank you very much for everyone that's putting comments in the question and answers. It's a bit of a juggle to try and read through them and answer and try and pick out things that aren't too specific and that will apply to a lot of the audience, obviously, that's listening. But I think maybe one point just to mention on when we're talking about when compliance and that handover kind of point is, we've had a question that is, what is the HSE's view on the LARC compliance elements of HSE 248 that apply to them? So sort of the handover documentation for closures to analysts, so about when that kind of compliance should begin. And I think obviously we are sitting from that transition process, so I don't know if Sam has anything.
Yeah, so the handover form was made available to licensed removal contractors via HSE's asbestos network, probably about 2, maybe 3 years ago. So they certainly have been aware of it. Obviously now it's within published guidance that will, anyone that hasn't been aware of it will now be aware of it. Obviously analysts needing to ensure that they receive that prior to commencing the 4-stage clearance. I mean, it might be worth just saying generally, I think George may have mentioned it earlier, but in terms of HSE's inspectors that are going to inspect removal jobs, they will be aware of the need for a transition across to the new HSD 248 and the guidance within it. So there won't be, you know, next week or next month expecting everyone to be fully sort of following all the guidance. So but yes, certainly once HGS 248 is published and it's out there, then we would definitely expect people to be using the handover form, particularly those that aren't already using it.
Thank you very much, Sam. There's a question that's come through here that I think is important just to sort of clarify again. Is obviously it's been posed, some of these questions to do with like the question around the bulk ID and the chemical prep. The question and answers through this and appropriate things through that, even that we've answered and have been made public and been typed in the question and answer forum, but also anything that we've had to go and get further clarification on would be added as a question and answer to the UKAS website to make sure they are available for everyone, to make sure there is a reference back there. So it will not just be a personal answer back to the laboratory that raised it, as long as it is something that isn't very specific to your laboratory activities and that wouldn't really be applicable to anyone else. We'll make sure that information is made available and in that central location on the asbestos transition web page that's on the UKAS website. So just to clarify that. Yeah, that's at least a couple of people have responded and queried that.
We've had a question in, can we share the recording of this webinar? Well, it will be available on the UKAS website. So yes, absolutely. Please feel free to share the link. There's a question in relation to the Control of Asbestos Regulations 2012, and again, I'd need to pass this on. Maybe Louise to start, and then if she wants to kind of get any other input, then please feel free. But if a sample is analysed at trace, just to confirm, this is not asbestos in regard to CAR 2012. Over to you, Louise.
Thanks, Paul. Yeah, it's with regard, there is a revised definition. If I'm again, I really need to look at the revised guidance to see what's there, but there is a slight change to the definition of trace in there, but it's to do with the obviously identifying the asbestos within the material as opposed to necessarily CAR for the quantity.
So is that something that you would be able to provide further information on when we send out the Q&As?
We can put something on the question and answers part.
That'd be great.
Juliet's just said, yeah, there's a few bits on there which apply to other people as well.
Yeah, fine, thank you.
There's also a question here that is around the electronic collection of air monitoring data and explaining that the change for the photographs that some IT providers and suppliers are struggling for the quantity of photographs required. And while the suppliers are working on this, is if there was any advice on the quantity of photographs. Now, I think I'd like to hand over to my technical colleagues on a comment about that, but I think I'd just like to say overall, as an accreditation process and the UKAS process, is we appreciate that you may have suppliers setups and things that need to be addressed and need to be looked at. And so it's really focusing around what, getting the most required and the most pertinent photographs in this instance or in other areas really addressing what are the key aspects and transitions that need to be made. And that's where the UKAS assessment will be looking. And we appreciate that if you're making the efforts and moving things on, that sharing that and being as open as possible about where you are in that process will be taken into consideration. Obviously, each different individual case would be looked at with the assessment team with UKAS. But I don't know if either Louise or George have any comments around that and anything around the photographs in this particular situation.
Yeah, Julia, I'll just add to that. Obviously, organisations will need to look at how they're going to present obviously the quality of photographs, but also the quantity and gathering them, as you've just said, in the right areas. And I guess in terms of assessing that, we'll be looking to see whether you've made the suitable changes. The number wise, I guess each organisation will vary depending on what the obviously I'm not aware of these issues that are being posed by the suppliers to implement the additional photographs needs. So I guess we'll be assess that on a case-by-case basis, and just to see that we've these efforts being made to obviously make those changes, and there will be obviously a period of time to allow for the transition, so it's not just as per the kind of the submission of your details for the transition, but there will be sort of a time frame for that, as George has gone through. So I think this will just need to be a case-by-case basis that we assess and see what the issues are. Trying to be pragmatic.
Sorry, Louise, I'll probably just add to that. Obviously, from now till September, there's a period of consolidation on this. So what I would say that if any feedback indicates that there is going to be, shall we say, an issue of significance that's going to affect majority of laboratories for whatever reason, then obviously the process of transition will take those aspects on board, whether it affects things like equipment, resource, or, you know, in this case, taking photographs, you know, if that's due to suppliers. But an evaluation will be made of these aspects in the coming weeks, months. So if, you know, until we've had an opportunity to see the impact of these changes, then obviously at this point in time we're not able to give specific guidance on this until we know how it's going to play out for all involved. So hopefully that gives some sort of measure of clarification at this point where we stand. Thanks.
I have a question here on limits of quantitation. And again, this may be very specific to a particular lab, but I think somebody's seeking general guidance. So as part of the transition, what must labs do to demonstrate they can undertake reassurance and/or ambient external air monitoring to the reduced LOQs? So just, I don't know, George, Louise, maybe some pointers in that direction might be useful.
Again, Paul, I'd probably just like to say I'd like to defer an answer to it until I've had an opportunity for myself to reread the guidance.
Okay, but that's something that we could provide just some rough pointers to, maybe as part of the
as part of
FAQs.
a response. Yeah.
Okay. George, is there anything you wanted to add to that?
Not at this point, Paul, no.
Okay.
I think that's quite specific in terms of, obviously there's changes with regards to the types of air monitoring that could be undertaken by laboratories going forwards, and they'll obviously need to make changes to their internal processes to accommodate them as applicable to their own contractual arrangements they have in place with their customers, and how they go about reporting their results as well. There's slight changes there, I understand. So until we know for certain the exact wording, then obviously in due course we can perhaps assist in that. But ultimately laboratories should be able to demonstrate their own technical competence to support the implementation of these technical guidance. So, you know, UKAS as the accreditation body has to be careful not to be seen to be consulting on this sort of thing. So we will obviously assist where we can on this, but there are limits or boundaries, shall we say, to what we can and cannot provide in terms of informing labs what they need to do in this particular issue.
Okay, thank you. Another question in here, a recommendation for 5% re-inspection of COR. Is this a recommendation or a must? Is that something, Sam, maybe you could answer?
No, I'd have to, yeah, no, I'll have to go away on that one unless George or Louise can answer that.
What I would probably just say to that, obviously the 5% is a figure which appears in more than one place, both in the HSC guidance and also in UKAS assessment requirements. And this is perhaps something that will probably follow up in due course, maybe in Lab 30, as and when that gets revised in due course to accommodate the changes, to make it clear what the, should we say, the minimum requirements will be with regards to this. Because I appreciate, similar to the world of inspection, this can create a little bit of discussion. So I wouldn't expect anything less with respect to the world of testing. And this is something that's going to be new as well for a lot of laboratories to be able to implement. So yes, I can't say for certain at this point what the figure will be for the purposes of demonstrating compliance for accreditation purposes, but that will hopefully, well, that not so much hopefully, that will become clear in due course as the guidance beds in. So, okay, thank you.
Sorry, it's Sam here. I think Shane Ferrelli's asked a question. It's something I made a point on earlier. So he's asked, Sam says HSE would be expecting to see handover forms from the LARC when HSG 248 is published. So should an analyst be requesting this from June? Apologies if I was gave that impression. Obviously, I did say there's a transition period in terms of what you're hearing about today, and so it'll probably be from June as soon as you have you've reviewed your procedures. So certainly HSE inspectors won't be expecting to see that from June. If I gave that impression, I apologise. But yeah, it's about changing the practice within this transition period that we've been talking about today. I hope that clears that up.
Thank you, Sam. There was a further question a little bit later on, which is that there is concern that if HSG 247 isn't issued as per 248, then the activities of the contractor may not be compliant or supportive of the analyst. For example, as a testing lab, they were given a handover form drafted by the licensed asbestos removal contractor via our customer, which was dated 3 days after the completion of the 4-stage clearance. I don't know if there's anything more that can be said on that.
No, I'll have to have a detailed look at the entire question. What I did answer one online, not live, about someone did ask about whether HSG 247 is being reviewed, and the answer is yes. Some of the technical review is currently going on, but this is likely to gain a bit more momentum next work year when it'll be being looked at by the asbestos unit. So unfortunately, yeah, there obviously is this disconnect between those two pieces of guidance, but hopefully, through our engagement with external stakeholders via the asbestos network, we'll be able to get messages across to the licence removal industry as well as yourselves.
Okay, thank you for that, Sam.
I've just had a question come through that I'd like to address, which is about the Lab 30 publication. And I think it's obviously fair to say that all these publications, there's an awful lot in the background that happens months and months and years before everything comes out. So we will be continuing, obviously, as it's been said earlier, the Lab 30 will be issued with its current changes to update it to the new version 17025. But the version that will follow that will then look at aligning it with the HSG 248 process, we are aiming to try and have that out and obviously have that done before the 1st of February 2022 to allow that to be out. Obviously you can imagine there's a lot of work that goes into that, and for the best laid plans while we are actually managing this transition at the same time, but UKAS will work very hard to get that out as soon as we can to give you that, and obviously it will be out for consultation again before that's out, so you will get that chance to have a look at it in the consultation period and make those comments back again. So that we will hope will be coming out obviously later this year for that to be on the consultation period. I'm very aware of some of the questions coming through are quite technical and specific, and while I appreciate that this is a chance for all of you to have pose these questions to UKAS, to HSE, and make the most, I would just like to reiterate, if anyone's got any transition and process queries, that we'd be really keen to hear those, and that we would try and keep it a little bit away from some of the technical points, because I appreciate we're still struggling to get some of that information in front of us to give you really sort of a comprehensive and informed answer at the moment. So again, thank you very much for all the questions. We do value and we will look across them and give what we can back, but if I could encourage anyone with any process or kind of timeline queries that we can address now, we'd appreciate that.
I think we'll give it another minute or so. There's nothing coming through particularly.
Yeah, I appreciate.
Yeah, another more technical one. Sorry, they're just catching my eye out of the corner of my eye. So I would just like to thank everybody, you know, from everybody who's put the presentations together and provided those. Sam and everybody over at HSE for all their hard work in getting the document together. A little bit of a stutter, but we'll get there shortly, I'm sure. And to my team for again providing the background to all of this, but also to everybody who's participated in today's webinar. Obviously, any questions that we've got that have come through that Q&A process, we will bring together and aim to give you some information on those. Again, as Juliet's kind of pointed out there, a lot of them have been quite technical, so it might take us a little while to give you a little bit more information on those. But certainly, if you've got any queries at all, the list of contacts is up here on the webinar. So please do feel free to drop a line to any of those people who should be able to direct you or answer the question directly themselves. So I think we're kind of approaching that hour that we'd set aside. Just having a final look at any more questions that have come in, and I can see that Sam's writing a response to one of those. But again, just thank you very much for setting aside time in your busy calendars to attend, and I hope everything goes well with your transitions. I think we'll aim to close at 11, if that's okay with everybody. So if you do have any queries that you want to put into the Q&A, please drop them in now. Otherwise, please do send them through separately. And thank you for your time.